This is a story about farming in the Okanagan with the First Nations people in the late 1800s. The Interior Salish people living in the Okanagan had a traditional economy that produced many different foods and vegetables. Arriving in 1880, the First Nations people were skilled with stock raising. They had horses, providing easy transportation and fit well with agriculture. The First Nations people learned to grow fruits and vegetables from the HBC company. By 1860s, miners and farmers moved into the Okanagan. Treaties were signed to prevent conflict from happening between the First Nations and Euro-Canadians. The treaties gave First Nations people access to their traditional hunting and fishing practices. They were given reserves. William Cox set aside large pieces of land for the First Nations reserves. The reserves were mostly flat land. In 1865, a rancher brought down 200 cattle for the winter. In 1864, the reserves were cut in half as Douglas retired as reserve commissioner. Joseph Trutch took over for Douglas as reserve commissioner. The land set aside by Cox was ignored, and a man named Mr. Haynes set aside smaller, less valuable areas of land. Now for ranching. Ranching was a way of life in the 1800s. One of the ranchers near Vernon had a great influence on agriculture in the Okanagan. It was owned by the Earl of Aberdeen, who was soon to be the Governor-General of Canada. He encouraged settlements, began orchards, and irrigation systems. The First Nations people were the main workforce for agriculture. They got paid in coupons that could be cashed in at stores, only to be used at that one store, whereas Euro-Canadians got cash. By the turn of the 20th century, the cattle industry was slowly disappearing. Having good irrigation was key to having a successful farm. During the decline of the cattle industry, fruit farming was becoming more and more popular. In the 1890s, the reserve system came into reality. First Nations reserves began dwindling in size. The chief of the tribe applied for land but had it taken. Getting access to water irrigation was also made very difficult for the First Nations. First Nations people were wards of the government, and they could not own land, therefore they could not farm, and relied heavily on the Europeans. The end.
Read the end.